gone. I explain everything to the man. At this point, I'm extremely creeped out and scared. I still need to get back home, but my parents aren't home. They went over to a friend's house, so I'm left home alone. I ask the stranger for a lift because I'm not going back there ever again. Thankfully, the stranger isn't a big old creep, and he kindly escorts me back home. I lock all the doors and check everything to make sure that I'm safe. Shortly after, my parents arrive, but I don't tell them anything because I don't want to worry them. I haven't gone out for a run today because, well, I'm genuinely scared. I'm terrified thinking about what would have happened if I was too tired to run and he caught me. I'll update you guys if anything happens. I don't think anything else will happen though, hopefully, but I'll definitely be keeping my ear to the ground and listening out for any stories too. Because who knows, maybe this isn't the first time. If anyone could provide some advice or information, it would be appreciated. Everyone that I've talked to about my experience doesn't really believe in the paranormal, so they've all just sort of brushed it off. I, a 25-year-old female, live alone in the suburbs of Atlanta. Last night at around 9:30 p.m. I took my dog outside in my backyard. For context, I have a large chain-linked fenced-in backyard that tried my best to ignore it. 5 seconds later, I heard the voice again. Hey. This time I could tell, though, that it was a woman's voice. The voice then continued saying, "Hey, come here, come here." It distinctly sounded like a woman trying to get me to come over there, but my gut told me to go inside ASAP. I freaked out and ran inside. My dog, sadly unaware of what was going on, refused to follow me inside. Visibly shaking, I frantically called my boyfriend, who rushed over to investigate the backyard. He, of course, found nothing and assured me that it was probably an animal. I've read a couple of stories about animals sounding like humans, and I tried my best to come up with a logical solution, but I am positive that I heard a human voice calling me. The voice was so clearly human. During my time outside last night, I never heard footsteps or rustling in the woods or anything. To me, it feels like whatever was calling me must have been right outside of my fence line and was calling me over so that I would be close enough to get to. I'm not sure if I experienced a person or some kind of creature, but whatever it was, it felt so evil, and I knew that I was in danger by being outside. I am absolutely terrified to go outside at night again, but I know that I can't avoid it. I have some lights around my backyard, but clearly not enough, so I plan on installing some around the fence perimeter. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Is there anything that I can do to prevent this from happening again? While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement of a 1917-built house next to a nightclub. I was preparing to go to sleep quite early since I had class at 8 a.m. the next day. Right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I forgot to lock the door, but since the city I lived in was generally quite safe, and the only way to get to the entrance of my place was past the front gate, all around to the other side of the house and down some stairs, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to fall asleep. Skip forward to the middle of the night. I wake up and feel someone or something slowly pulling my blanket off of me. In a confused state, I extend my hand and feel a hairy male arm under my fingers. My first thought was, oh, this is probably my drunk flatmate, but then I remembered that he was at his girlfriend's place on the other side of town. In pitch black, I jump up from my bed, rush to the light switch, and I turn it on. And I find a stranger, around my age, student, standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet. My initial reaction was to stay calm, since I had no idea if this dude was violent or what was even going on in the first place. I calmly asked him, "Man, what are you doing in here?" He was clearly very confused as well, and took a seat on a recliner that I had in my tiny room. And there we were, both in our underwear, him covered in himself after he wet himself, and I on the border of wetting myself, and what does he do? He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. At that point I go, "Okay dude, get out of my house," and start escorting him to the hallway, where I find all of his clothes and shoes on the floor. As I'm escorting him out, he goes into the bathroom and locks himself inside. I hear him turn on the shower and proceed to knock on the door saying, "Hey man, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." To which he replies, "I'm not afraid of the police." Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? A few minutes pass and he steps out of the bathroom butt naked, with my flatmate's towel around his waist, looks at me looking kind of content and says, "Hey, did you see they've got a shower here?" At that point, I am fuming. "This is my house," I say. "You're a total stranger and you just broke into my place." Suddenly, an expression of complete fear appears on his face. "Oh, what have I done?" he says. He says this as he's very awkwardly trying to get dressed in the hallway. Then I finally managed to get him out of the house. I even called one of his friends from my phone to come and pick him up at the club. Turns out he's from a completely other town and came to party to the capital, got kicked out of the club for starting a fight, and somehow managed to get to my place. To this day, I have no idea what he was on or how the heck he even managed to find my apartment, as it was pretty hidden from the street. Which I guess is the weird thing about this story. Anyway, going through something like this is terrifying. I know it's probably a little bit amusing for others to hear this story, but let's just say that I never forgot to lock the door from that day on. When I was little, I lived in an apartment and my dad was gone for 2 weeks on a business trip. I was home alone with my mum. I was never really scared easy, as I've always been in love with investigating the paranormal, yet respecting it at the same time. If I go into a room and I don't feel welcome, I just don't stay. It just seems like common sense to me, but I kept having these nightmares, all from what I could tell the same night. I'd be sleeping in bed with my mum. I was pretty young at this point, and I woke up. Shortly after, though, a big clown would always pop in and see me awake. I would wake my mum up, and it would charge at us and slaughter us in the dream. The clown was emotionless with black and small eyes. I don't ever remember seeing a mouth, but I know that it had one. It was white and grey and severely overweight, at least 400 to 500 pounds. It was about the size of the door frame, so almost 6'8", and it never made any sound verbally or physically by walking. It cast a feeling of dread, yet at the same time I got the feeling that it just didn't want to be seen. I got the feeling that it was curious and observant of me and didn't want to be caught or known about. So, like I said, I had this dream and I was terrified to do anything by myself. But there was one more night before my dad was coming home, and I was terrified that I'd be sleeping in my own bed again. We went to bed and eventually I fell asleep. But I woke up right after the same dream for like the 14th time in a row, except this time I had that feeling of dread still. Something in my gut told me that it was happening in real life now. I closed my eyes and pretended to go to sleep. I cracked them as far open as I could while still looking asleep and sort of positioned myself under my blanket perfectly to keep an eye on the door. I waited so long, but in the end nothing happened. I finally started to breathe normal, and that was when something happened. The same exact clown from the same exact dream walked into the doorway. I looked at my mum, then looked at me. It sat there silently, I'd assume making sure that we were asleep, then just walked out. I never heard 1 ounce of sound from him, but I could hear the AC. I heard the front door open and close too. After that, I got up and I didn't go back to bed that night. But the weirdest thing was that the next day, my dad asked my mum why the front door was unlocked, and she asked me if I unlocked it. She knew that I'd stayed up that night. In the end, I just said yes because I knew that if I told them the truth that I would sound crazy. So this has been happening for around 3 days now. It only ever happens when I'm in my bedroom or close to it, just outside of my room in the hallway or something. Every few minutes I'll hear a sort of high-pitched scream or crying. It's not loud though, it's sort of on the same level as mumbling, I guess, or maybe whispering, but I can still make it out, what it sounds like. It started about 3 days ago. I was playing on my PS4 with headphones on and I kept hearing weird noises in my room. Sometimes it was a sort of screaming or yelling type noise, and sometimes it was sobbing. The sobbing noise is hard to describe. It's like when someone's crying so hard that they start choking, and they only last for about 2 seconds, or sometimes they're really quick and are only a split second. I thought that it was just background noises in the game at first, and I kept looking around for the source of the noise, but I found nothing. I thought it must have been my headphones making a weird noise because they're a little broken, so I just ignored it at that time. But the next day I was lying in my bed watching YouTube at around 9 p.m. when I started to hear the same noises again. This time I thought that it was my pet bird making the noise for some reason, so I got up to check on her and she was sleeping. I've had birds in the past that sometimes make noises in their sleep, but this one doesn't, so I knew that it wasn't her. So I went back to bed and carried on watching YouTube. A few minutes later, the noises started again. I tried to just ignore it and hope that it would go away, but it didn't. The noises went from happening every few minutes to about every 10 seconds. I actually started to get really scared at this point, and I sat up. But as soon as I did, the noises suddenly stopped. That cycle repeated for the rest of the night too until I went to sleep at around 11. I'd watch YouTube, hear noises, keep still, start moving, the noises suddenly stop, and repeat all over again. The same thing has been happening to me today as well, except the noises are not as frequent. I have no idea what's causing this, and honestly it's getting more annoying than frightening at this point. Although it really does sound like someone screaming and crying. I really don't know what to do, and if you've got any ideas as to how to figure this one out, then please do let me know. I feel like I've looked everywhere and I just cannot understand where this noise is coming from. So this is not my story, but my dad's. He grew up with a single mum and 4 other siblings in southeast Texas, on the border of Louisiana, in the bad part of town. The house that this happened in was behind a nightclub. He was born in 1967 and says that this happened when he was 2, and he still remembers it. He says him and his brother, who was maybe 6 at that time, were sleeping on the couch in their living room, and they both woke up to a black-eyed child standing in the doorway of their closet. He said that the child looked older than them by a little, had black eyes and orange hair, and had a slight sort of glow to him, like he was under his own spotlight almost. He said that him and his brother tried to scream, but nothing would come out. Then the child just suddenly disappeared before their eyes. And the reason that everybody knows that this is true is that a couple of months ago, me and my mum and my dad, we were at my grandma's house and my uncle was watching a documentary on black-eyed children when my dad brought up what happened to them all those years ago. And my uncle started tearing up a bit and just kept repeating, Man, you seen that too? I thought that I was crazy. I can't believe that you saw him too. My uncle has a history of drug usage and mental health problems, and all of these years, for over 50 years, he assumed that what he had seen was fake, and just his mind playing tricks on him. It's sad too, because we think that this situation shook him up so badly as a kid that it might have been the cause of his use of drugs as a teen, to cope with the thought that he may have been going crazy. They were so scared that they just never brought it up ever again after that. But my dad always told my mum that story ever since they started dating. My grandma, who was sitting there listening to them talk about what happened, just said, "Oh, there was something in that house, Lord." And after hearing that, I'm going to try and get her to tell me about her experiences in that same house. So my wife and I moved into her grandma's old house maybe 3 years ago now. My wife always told me that her grandma would tell her the closet and the bathroom in the master bedroom were haunted. Grandma never really shared details. I always thought that these kinds of stories were dumb, so I just didn't ask questions. And the house was normal and still is, I think. But fast forward to last month. We now have 2 children. One is a 2-year-old girl and one is a 3-month-old newborn. My 2-year-old is very ahead in preschool as far as talking in full sentences and anything cognitive. My 2-year-old is very ahead in preschool as far as talking in full sentences and anything cognitive. When we had our newborn, the 2-year-old wanted back in our room because, well, she felt left out. I know, go ahead and judge the parenting. But about 2 months ago, my 2-year-old was at my parents' house for a sleepover. My daughter has a tablet that I let her use on aeroplanes or long travel to watch kids' videos and whatnot. The phone hadn't been used in some time and was in this closet. I have YouTube Premium, which will play videos without the screen being activated. The phone started playing loud "Rain, Rain, Go Away" music. We opened up the phone and YouTube said, "Video unavailable." We have video footage of this, by the way. If someone needs footage, I can probably share it, but a couple of weeks later, I still think my wife is full of it. We go to the park with our 2-year-old. She's swinging, there's no wind. All the swings around her aren't moving an inch from the wind, which they should, since they would actually attract more air resistance. But 2 swings at the end are fully swinging like kids are on them. It was weird. And I also have some footage of that too. Anyway, I work night shifts this month, so I don't get home until 2 in the morning. At 2 weeks, my daughter has been lying in bed with my wife and will go point to the ceiling saying, "Mean cloud, go away, black cloud, go." At the time, my wife just shrugged it off and assured her everything is okay and she would go back to sleep. But the last week, things have gotten worse. My daughter will say the same things, but cover her ears and try hiding in my wife's chest to get away and start screaming as loud as she can. My wife talked to her grandma, who used to live here, and she came over 3 days ago. My wife recorded her privately for audio in her pocket. At this point, we think, what the heck is going on? My wife asked her grandma, without the 2-year-old around, about how the house was haunted, and grandma said, "Oh, honey," and walked to the bedroom and shut the closet and the bathroom door. They returned to the living room and Grandma said, "Sorry, can't let them listen." Grandma started with saying, "Oh, you think you'd scare me?" referencing whatever was going on. Grandma stated that she would tell the black cloud, "Oh, you think you're funny? It was some sort of cloud, so it kept swooping at me." Finally, I just said, "Well, you're wasting your time. I'm not scared of you." To be noted, too, is that Grandma now has dementia and stated that she now thinks this might have been a dream. This is also on video. Personally, I feel ridiculous even sharing this because I don't believe in paranormal activity at all. But tonight, I was working and my wife called me in tears as she woke up to my 2-year-old hunched over yelling "no, no," and tried to grab her to calm her down. My daughter climbed under the bed and started banging her head off the ground and busted her lip, causing it to bleed. I came home as fast as I could, and my daughter's mouth was slightly bleeding. She was shaking. Like I said, it's more than likely night terrors and a weird sequence of events, now that my wife is more paranoid, i.e. lights being on that we never use, clocks dying more than normal, daily in fact, the swings at the park swinging next to my daughter with no wind, on video like I said. I really don't know what to think about any of this now, and if you have any advice, then I would love to hear it. I'm more than likely going to take her to the doctor to make sure that she isn't sick or vitamin deficient or something like that. I want my wife and kid at ease, and I just want this to be over and done with. About 19 years ago, near my hometown in country New South Wales, I used to get driven to catch a bus from a town called Parkes, about 1.5 hours from my hometown, to go and visit my then boyfriend in another town several hours away. The bus that I had to travel to get to left from Parkes at around 2 in the morning, and it arrived back late at night, and my dad would always pick me up. And on 2 separate occasions, we saw something strange. On the first occasion, we were driving along the country road in between 2 towns. The road ran in between fenced-off farms. There were hills behind these farms that were sort of silhouetted against the often bright night sky, and we saw a big ball of light traveling down the hill parallel to our car, probably a couple of kilometers away, and we thought that it was just a truck at first, possibly driving along there, until we both realized that there wasn't actually a road there, and it was 1 light, not 2. Like car headlights have 2 headlights, right? And it definitely wasn't a motorcycle. Just because there wasn't a road there didn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a vehicle though, but it moved so smoothly and quickly, and we just thought that it was really weird, I guess. We didn't really think too much about it, until a few weeks later, when we were doing the same drive late at night, possibly a bit after midnight, and we saw the same light in the same area, moving quickly and smoothly again. This time, Dad decided to stop the car and turn off the engine, and when he did that, the light came down the hill and it was hurtling towards us across the farm fields and over the fence that divided the farms from the road, and man, it was fast. The ball of light was probably about 2 meters off the ground and had a diameter of around 1.5 meters, I would say. It was huge, silent, a ball of light that kind of fluctuated and rotated as it moved. It slowed and covered in the middle of the road behind our car, probably about 50 meters from behind us. Eventually, though, it slowed and hovered in the middle of the road behind our car, probably about 50 meters behind us. I was terrified, but Dad was fascinated, watching it inquisitively. I was panicking and yelling to start the car and drive. I'm not sure what happened after that because Dad turned the engine on and we just started driving. We never saw that light again, but that was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. And every now and again I mention it to my dad, just so that I know that I'm not going crazy, and Dad always confirms every detail of it with me. I'm glad we were both there because otherwise I would probably think that I was going mad. I hadn't heard of Min-Min lights until years later. The things that people have described as Min-Min lights match exactly what we saw. I'll never forget it, and I'm wondering if anyone else has ever seen something like this in country New South Wales. I've read lots of stories of these sorts of lights in Queensland, but not New South Wales. I used to hang out with my cousin a lot. We were both 10 and male at the time of this encounter, and I'm now 33. It has always stayed with me too, ever since then. We'd mostly spent our youth roaming the streets as young kids, Not causing trouble, but kicking footballs around fields, climbing, hanging out with kids our age, the typical stuff before iPads and Netflix became commonplace. One day, we decided to go and explore a part of town that we'd never explored before. It meant going through alleyways and back streets. The trail would actually end approximately 2 to 3 minutes from my house, which was a safe part of the neighborhood. It was a sunny day, albeit not too warm, and my cousin and I had been walking for what seemed like miles. The journey we'd planned was supposed to go on for longer, but we got bored and decided to take our detour home. The detour involved cutting through an alleyway that looked a little bit like the Coronation Street Ginnel, if anyone is familiar with the TV show. To the left of us were terraced houses, and to the right of us, steel fences with sharp points to deter any would-be thieves. We continued up there, and soon enough, one of the kids from our school lived there, and his mum shouted, "What are you boys doing here?" We ran. I don't know why. We just didn't like her son, and her tone was accusatory, I guess. As we ran, we bumped into another kid. "Don't go that way," he said, as his voice trailed off as he ran farther and farther away from us, down the opposite end of the alleyway. We shrugged and continued on. It got darker with the streets and foliage, but we soon emerged from the alleyway, and that's when we saw the lone boy. A boy, aged maybe 10 to 12, stood there. His eyes were empty. He had a vacant look on his face. Well, the half of his face that we could see well enough. Above his mouth was covered with a veil, somewhat like a Halloween mask of some description, except it was June. Halloween was months away. As we got closer, we noticed that the boy had a kitchen knife in his hands. I mean, a fully real stainless steel kitchen knife, both hands on the handle. The sunlight made the blade glisten. We cracked a joke. "Cooking outside?" But he looked at us blankly. No emotion, nothing. We were too freaked out to move now, and that's when we realized that he hadn't moved either, not a muscle. We saw him blink, but physically the knife hadn't been raised up or pointed at us, just held closely to his chest, blade pointing upwards. We figured that we should get away because instinct told us that this was weird and a bit freaky. Going back down the alleyway didn't seem like a safe option. Being stuck in the alley with a strange kid with a knife didn't seem smart either. In front of us was a road on a steep hill. It was our best bet. We walked up to the top of the hill, keeping an eye on this kid. The top of the hill was maybe 2 to 3 minutes from my house in terms of distance, and at last we felt safe. As we looked back down the hill, the lone kid had put the knife by his leg, now holding it in one hand, but remained in the exact same spot, and stared right back up at us, expressionless. When we got home, we told our parents what had happened, and they called a local community enforcement team to scout the area. And apparently the kid was found with the knife, but we never heard why he was there or what he was doing. 23 years after it happened, and it's still on my mind a lot. So my very first experience happened when I was about 3 to 4 years old. I used to live in this cute little house in a very close-knit community or neighborhood up in Massachusetts. It was a modest house with an upstairs, ground floor, and cellar areas. Immediately upon walking through the front door, the living room was to your right, the kitchen to your left, and a staircase was directly to your front. At the top of the stairs, there were 2 rooms to the left and right, which was my room on the right and my parents' room to the left. Now, I don't remember much about my parents' room, but mine felt humongous as a kid. There were a lot of interesting things about my room too, but one of the most interesting things about it was the closet. I was unaware of it, but there was a door at the top of my closet that went up into the attic-themed sort of bedroom above mine. The closet was very small, a typical one with a light bulb and a dangle string to turn it on and off, and a rod to hang clothes. Needless to say, the door was definitely oddly placed. My parents never used it, which is even more odd in retrospect, but Anyway, my first experience, as you could probably guess, happened in my bedroom. I kept some of my toys in my closet, and I had pulled them out at one point. It was a blue rectangular Lego bucket filled with miscellaneous toys and doohickeys, and of course Legos. I'd also pulled out some pieces of paper, Play-Doh, and colored pencils at one point. I was going ham with every toy and entertaining item that I had. And well, my dad had been in the habit of drawing cubes at the time, and that had confounded my childhood brain. I kept thinking, how in the world is he putting the pencil into the paper to draw the back part of the cube like that? So just imagine a little booger-nosed child sitting in front of an open closet with all his toys, Legos, and snakes made out of Play-Doh, stabbing a piece of paper with a colored pencil, trying to draw the back of a cube. When all of a sudden I was distracted by a noise in the closet, and upon looking up, noticed the little dangle switch for the light bulb was swaying back and forth. I thought absolutely nothing of it, and continued stabbing my paper. A couple of moments later, another noise came from the closet, but this time the dangle was flailing back and forth like crazy. I thought to myself, adult stuff that I don't understand, whatever, and continued on. I apparently was able to ignore that. Child me just didn't give a hoot, without giving it a second thought, and then the noise changed. I looked up again to see the string completely motionless, and it proceeded to pull down over and over again, turning the light on and off. Then the door literally closed by itself. Never seen that before. Must be adult stuff. Whatever, I thought. This is one of those experiences that I guess gave me extra goosebumps later on, because I only realized it in hindsight that that was not supposed to happen. Now, the other experience I had in this room was around the same time frame, except that it was pretty much every night. I'm willing to concede that perhaps this is my childhood mind going wild before bedtime, and it could have been a persistent nightly hallucination, I guess. It's doubtful based on what I remember, but still, it's possible. Now, my bed was in the far corner of my room from the bedroom door, and next to my bedroom door there was a window. I laid in my bed facing this window every night, and it was what I usually focused on as I fell asleep. The interesting thing that would happen, though, was that a pale blue light would be in my window every night. It wasn't this sort of brazenly bright, tangible light or anything, mind you. I didn't just have Casper floating in my window is what I'm getting at. It was more accurately described as a sort of mist, I guess. It was like it was there, but also it sort of wasn't. Almost like when you're in the dark and you look at something long enough that it starts to change, but it obviously isn't changing. Hard to articulate, but regardless, when I looked at the light, it became whatever I would think about it. At the time, I loved Iron Giant movies, so that is what I constantly imagined. It would be the Iron Giant in the distance, but transparent and bluish, walking toward my house, but never getting any closer. I'd watched this until I fell asleep for months, and I don't really recollect when it stopped, but it never seemed scary to me. Weird, right? Anyway, my parents had their own experiences in the house too, so there was definitely something going on. I might go over those as well at some point, but I want to focus on what I saw or heard directly with my own 2 eyes and ears. So fast forward roughly 10 years, and I'm about 13 to 14 years old. I had moved to Virginia in this time, but I had to move back to Massachusetts to visit my grandmother with my family for a holiday. She lived in an apartment complex, and her apartment was very cozy and decently sized. I had visited this place many times as a kid, because my parents needed a break from me and dropped me off to my grandma's. And I had never really experienced anything weird, I guess you could say, even in hindsight. Needless to say then, when they asked me to take the couch in the living room at night, I really thought nothing of it, and I obliged. So there I was, in the pitch black darkness, laying on the couch at 1 or 2 in the morning in my grandmother's apartment. I had my Game Boy with my Pokemon Emerald game inserted, and for those of you familiar with Pokemon, specifically Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, there is a Pokemon named Zigzagoon with the ability Pickup that allows them to be holding random goodies after a battle sometimes. You could get gold nuggets and rare candies in the beginning of the game in Ruby and Sapphire by using this method to farm them, but they had apparently nerfed this method in Emerald and made the loot level-based. So picture me on the couch slowly figuring this out on my own and becoming increasingly annoyed at Pokemon. It sort of randomly dawned on me that I was in the pitch black darkness. I wasn't scared of the dark, but this thought came to me in a way that I can only describe as artificially, I guess. I normally wouldn't have cared, and I was definitely more focused with farming resources in Pokemon. But immediately upon having this realization, I suddenly heard something on the ceiling. It was almost muffled, but it sounded like a man constantly mumbling without a pause. I sort of perked up and looked up at the ceiling like, what is that? Bear in mind, it sounded like it was in the room with me, not a neighbor above or anything. The sound began to get louder and the words became more discernible. They were my thoughts. Freaked out, I casually got under the covers while assuring myself that I wasn't actually scared. I'm just cold and I'm getting comfy, is what I told myself. Now, when I say that they were my thoughts, what I mean is that whatever I thought, this thing or whatever it was would recite it. It was sort of like a mumbled whisper, but if I thought the word dog, it would start saying dog over and over and over again. If I thought any word, it would say it. Under the blankets, I turn the volume on my Pokemon game to max and I press it against my face and fly my character to the battle frontier for the loudest music in the game. But it didn't help. As a matter of fact, the voice descended down slowly from the ceiling while it also became louder. When it got to the point where I definitely couldn't ignore it anymore, I just listened and I grasped how it worked. My teenage mind immediately decided, haha, I can make it say the F word and other expletives. So that's exactly what I did. I made it say the most outrageous stuff that I could think of. And for about 30 seconds, that was hilarious. But then it wasn't. It was right next to my head, and pretty much just as loud as a real man whispering next to me. The thing that really began to scare me was how relentless it was with its whispers, and as I got scared, my thoughts began to reflect that. As I said before, it recited my thoughts, and I was thinking things like, what is that? What is that? It's right next to my head. These were the things that were being repeated back to me. That freaked me out into fight or flight mode, and in the end I chose fight. I immediately flipped my blanket off of my head and launched a haymaker in the direction of the sound. It immediately stopped, and when I looked around, there was nothing there. That was pretty much it for that situation, and it was the last time that I ever experienced anything of that nature. I'm now 27 years old, so I'm starting to become a bit more of a skeptic, I guess you could say, but it's just something that I'll never forget, what I experienced that night, and I have trouble shaking it off as just a hallucination. But I'm curious to hear as to what you guys have to say, and any of your thoughts on these things. Have you had any similar experiences, and what do you think that this all could have been? Let me start off by saying a couple of things. I'm autistic and I have a hard time narrowing down a story to a couple of lines, so this may be a bit longer than it needs to be. Me and my mum are both believers. We've had plenty of experience with the paranormal in the past, and I've been open to the paranormal since a young age. Whether that be shadow people, relatives that have passed on, come to visit us, possessions, you name it, we've probably had some sort of an experience with it. Now, I work as a delivery person. I deliver papers and ads in my city. I use a metal wagon cart to put the papers and stuff in so that I can take more with me on one trip. I pull this behind me. It's important to the story, I promise. I like to do this work in the evening though, because I like how quiet it is and the fact that not many people are outside, so I can do my work in peace and avoid talking to people. And this all happened in the span of 30 minutes. So the first thing that happened was a cold hand touched me on my right shoulder. It felt like a right hand. The hand was not icy cold, but really as cold as a corpse, if that makes sense. It didn't put a lot of pressure on me or anything. It was more as to, like, get my attention or whatever. Like, say you're walking behind someone and you want their attention. I was pulling my cart behind me, so this simply wouldn't be possible for someone to touch my right shoulder with their right hand like that. I looked around in confusion, thinking to myself, okay, that's weird. I did not see anyone or anything around me. The nearest people near me were across the parking lot. The second paranormal thing happened maybe 2 minutes after on in the same street as the first encounter, just a little further away. I think that they may be related, but I'm not sure. There's a restaurant at the corner of the street in my town with automatic doors that you have to come closer to so that they open. You have to be within like 1 to 2 meters for the door to register a person. I was walking 5 meters away from the door and the door opened. I looked inside and didn't see anyone in the hallway. All I saw was the person at the register cleaning the counter. I walked past, not really thinking anything of it. I left my cart at the corner of the street and crossed the street to deliver a few papers. I came back, grabbed another one for said restaurant, and went to put it in the mailbox. I turned to go and walk towards the mailbox, and I see the door opening again from quite far away. This time I was a good 7 meters away from the sensor, and behind a pillar that's in front of the restaurant, so there's no way I could have triggered it. I walked around the pillar and felt something shoving or kicking my butt. It wasn't hard and it didn't hurt, but it was enough to make me stumble and force me to take another step. I looked around me and again, there was no one there. I thought maybe it was those people that I saw in the parking lot earlier, but they were quite far away by then. I wasn't scared as much as I was unnerved, I guess, that two things happened so close together like that. I called my mum right as that happened though, and I told her what was going on. While on the phone with her, I continued to walk my route and everything was fine. I moved into the next section without anything else happening and I hung up. Now, the third thing happened in the next section of my route, and it completely freaked me out. One of the streets I have to deliver on is a cul-de-sac type